The slave labor prison camp was the hardest one for me to understand, because they said the body of their sister was still being kept in the morgue under lock and key by the slave labor prison camp. And I said, how is that possible? Because so many people have just been killed, and the communist regime, they just burn bodies, they just destroy evidence. How is it even possible? And so they said, we're going to prove it to you. They went and filmed undercover inside the slave labor prison camp, and they got admissions directly from the head of the camp, the director of the camp, who says on camera in our movie, yes, we have the body. We have more bodies. This isn't the first one. We pay, X number of dollars a year to keep it in the morgue, and we will give it to you if you sign papers to say that your sister died of natural causes.
Right.
If you want to say that she was tortured or anything like that, I can't help you. See you later.
Welcome to the show today, folks. We have a very special guest today. I'm really honored to have Kay Rubacek on the channel. Kay is an author. She is an award-winning filmmaker, distinguished journalist. She writes for the Epoch Times. She has a family history of fighting communism. This is something that she has also experienced firsthand. 3 generations fighting it. She's committed to fighting for the truth and sharing about communism and socialism in the world today. So thank you for your time, Kay.
Oh, thanks, Ken. I'm so glad to be able to talk with you about this. Thanks for having me on.
Let's just give our viewers a little bit of a backdrop. I know that your family, it goes back 3 generations, I believe, back to the 1920s, where, tell us about how they fled communism and all that.
It's funny, every time I tell this story, especially to a group of people, I often ask who else's family who else has some connection to a family member that's fled communism. And you'd be surprised how many people put up their hands. And so even though my family escaped multiple times, my story isn't necessarily unique. It's just that I'm actually talking about it, because too often our history books aren't teaching us about these things, it's history that's connected to all of us. And that's what I find I'm reminded about all the time, is that it's not just me. So many of us have this experience. And but it is 3 times with my family. So in the 1920s, my great-grandparents and grandparents had to escape Russia when it became the Soviet Union was taken over by the Bolsheviks and the Soviet, communists. And they fled by foot. Half of my family fled by foot, and it took them 5 years to get to safety. And they landed in China, and that was before the Chinese Communist Party took over. And my father was born and raised in Northeast China as a young Russian boy living there. But once the Chinese Communist Party took over in 1949, then it wasn't too long before foreigners were no longer welcome. And so even though my family had been welcomed there for more than a decade, they were no longer welcome. And they were very lucky to find safety to escape through their church in Hong Kong. That was how they, through connections, through church connections via Hong Kong, they went to Australia. And Australia, they were able to find freedom there and kind of rebuild their lives away from what seemed to be very far away at the time. Communism seemed very far away from Australia. But then I was born and raised in Australia, and my husband's family, I met my husband in Sydney, Australia, and his family escaped communism in the former Czech Republic, former Czechoslovakia, now known as the Czech Republic. And that was in the 1980s. And it was only 5 years before the Berlin Wall fell that they escaped. And my mother-in-law's told me multiple times that if she had known that the wall would come down, if she had even the tiniest sense or concept that the Berlin Wall would fall, they would never have left, because they had everything there. They had their family, they had property, they had business, they had work, they had friends. But they escaped for freedom. And only 5 years later, the Berlin Wall fell. And for me, that's a reminder constantly that there is always hope, no matter how difficult things may seem or how impenetrable or concrete things may seem to be. They do change. So her story always gives me a lot of hope.
Yes. And so as a young, I guess you were a teenager, were you 19 or 21, and you decided to go into China? Some of the protests were going on in Tiananmen Square, and you had a rather shocking experience. I think you say you were naive, maybe.
Oh, you bet I was. Yeah, you know, growing up, my parents really didn't talk much about communism. And I think it's a lot of people don't, because one, it's not in the history books. And two, those who escaped it don't want to relive it because it's just so awful. It's so terrifying and it's so fearful. And so my family didn't really want to talk about it. So my father was never a big talker anyway, and he just told us sometimes that they didn't have enough food. I mean, I found out later that he was lucky, very lucky, to survive the beginnings of what was called the Great Famine in China, where 45 million people are estimated to have died because of communist policies. So, and he told me that I was naive and ignorant when I told him that I was going to China to peacefully appeal. I said, I'm not protesting. I'm not breaking any laws. I'm going to hold a banner on Tiananmen Square. And he said, you don't know what you're doing. And he was right, but I'm also very stubborn. And I really wanted to see it for myself, because at that time, there was a lot of protests about people who were practicing the Falun Dafa spiritual practice. And they were being arrested and thrown into prison for 3 words: truth, compassion, and tolerance. And I was thinking, look, this is just ridiculous. It just doesn't make sense. And for me, I had an opportunity to go. I found out that there was an American, actually, American Caucasian man going. And so a friend of mine told me, and I said, I'll go too, because really, I mean, I'd been doing those spiritual exercises, meditation, for a few years, and it had been great for my health. So I thought, that could be me. It's like trying to ban yoga or jogging in the park. And that's what they did in China. And so naively, I went to China. I didn't know if I would be arrested because, you know, I had an Australian passport, white skin, and I'm not Chinese. Even though my father was born there, he has an Australian passport. So I really thought I would be okay, but I was naive. I didn't know. I had never come face to face with communism. And there I was, within 30 seconds, holding the word compassion. That was the word I was holding on Tiananmen Square in a public space: compassion. And I was arrested for that. I was beaten and thrown into a basement prison cell. And you think about it, the police told me, they said, those words are illegal in China.
Yeah.
And they're not just words, are they? You say compassion or truth, they're more than just words. That's something that I feel are universal values, and that any good person in the world wants those things. This is really what led me on a journey to become a filmmaker. I was already working in production, but I wanted to understand, really go into a journey to understand, how can a human being become so twisted, and what could cause them to say that truth is illegal, that compassion is illegal, that tolerance is illegal. And that's really, that event was absolutely eye-opening, and sent me on this journey since then.
So when you were in prison, did you feel threatened and interrogated? Were you fearful of your life? Or
Yes, absolutely. I really think they weren't going to kill me. That's, you know, I felt protected. You know, I have a lot of faith, and I felt that I was doing something right. And that what I was, so that was ultimately inside me, that I felt like I was, you know, I've got a lot of conviction, and I am stubborn, as I mentioned, but I really felt that I shouldn't be, for holding the word compassion, I shouldn't be tortured. I shouldn't be killed for this. But there is that thought that goes through your mind of people disappear in China. People just don't come out of prison. But I had a strong sense beyond my faith that my Australian passport would help me, and it did. But while I was there, I saw my friend. He had his fingers broken. He had his nose was bloodied and bruised and bleeding. Others who were taken away on their own came back very bruised and assaulted. So I really tried hard not to be taken away from the small group that we were in, and so I insisted on that. They tried all methods of intimidation. There was one moment they were screaming and yelling very fiercely. Older Chinese men, and I was a young girl. I mean, I think I was 20 years old, and here they were booming and screaming at me in their uniforms and everything, all the things they were going to do. Half the things I couldn't understand. They were yelling in Chinese. They were beating. I saw them beat and assault some Caucasian men in front of us because they were trying to intimidate us. They tried to make me sign papers, but all the papers were in Chinese. I don't know what they were saying. And they were screaming and yelling, trying to get me to sign these papers, but I refused to do that. And then they took an about face and decided to bring out food. It had been about 20 hours. I hadn't been allowed to use the bathroom. When I had asked to use the bathroom, they insisted that I have 8 police officers standing in front of me with the stall doors open. And it was just insane. And then suddenly they turned around and brought out this, you could smell it coming, this beautiful restaurant food, and like a Chinese meal in boxes, and said, here's some food, bottled water. I was very thirsty. But they had big television cameras rolling, pointed at me, and they said, you can eat. And I said, not with the cameras on, because I know what the propaganda's like. They would be saying, look how well we treat these, this Caucasian woman who has supposedly broken the laws, which I broke no law holding compassion in a public place, but they wanted to make a point. So I refused to eat the food while they had the cameras on, and they refused to let me eat. I got no food. They took it away because they only wanted it for propaganda purposes. And that just says so much. They were not there to try and make peace or care and provide a meal after 24 hours, almost 24 hours of not eating. It was only for propaganda purposes. So all of those things combined just really gave me a sense of how the people there are treated and what extent what pressure they're under to follow the communist regime, to be able to think that way and force those really manipulative propaganda tactics onto people. And that's what the Chinese people are seeing. They're seeing propaganda in their news, and it's really very disturbing, actually. The whole process was extremely eye-opening.
Yeah, I think it's maybe in your book, but the fact that one of the I think it was one of the officers said, to his daughter, go watch this, because the Chinese, the propaganda, as you mentioned, they're going to twist this. I mean, even though 10,000 students were killed, they're going to twist this in a period of time, and the propaganda machine's going to kick in. And I think they pitch it now as, there was an insurrection, and 3 or 4 soldiers got killed because of these insurrectionist students here or something. Does that sound about right, or am I close on that? It does.
Yes, and to add to that story, so that is a chapter in my book, and it's that chapter is called I believe it's called "Daughter, Go Watch the Slaughter."
Yes.
And so one of the former Chinese Communist Party officials that I interviewed, he said to me, well, it was funny because when he was talking to me at first, he didn't want to be interviewed by me. He looked me up and he saw, okay, young Caucasian woman, doesn't speak Chinese. She will not understand what I've been through. And I had to work hard to get that interview with him. And even in the room with him, he didn't give me much he gave me answers, but I'm not there asking for respect from the interviewees, but you're kind of hoping that you can find a meeting of the minds, at least a willingness to provide information, because I really wanted to learn. And when he found out that I had been arrested in China and spent a day in a Chinese prison, and that my father was born and raised in China, he looked at me differently, and he began to answer my questions differently. And he told me how that in 1989, he was like deputy police chief in the capital city of China, Beijing, very high ranking position. And he said he knew everything that was going on in the military at that time on Tiananmen Square. He was stationed there. He was one of the ones who had to pull the trigger to send the soldiers off and the tanks into Tiananmen Square, where they massacred brutally innocent students and citizens. And yes, what you describe is correct. He called his daughter and he said, "Go out and watch it now." And he called her and said, "Go on the balcony and watch what's going on in Tiananmen Square." And I'm listening to him thinking, that's crazy. I'm a mother. I would never do that. I would I would want to hide that from my children. I don't want to see it myself, let alone, I don't want them to have to witness that. But his concept was that he's been through decades of studying communism, and it took him years to learn, and all this tragedy, before he realized how evil the regime is. And he wanted his daughter to not be propagandized by the regime like he had been. And so he wanted her to see how they kill and how they mass murder in a public place. And that afterwards, she saw what happened on the news, the television news. Yes, they said, oh, some students attacked soldiers and a few soldiers died, and they held a massive memorial for those soldiers. But the citizens, more than 10,000 people killed, those families, they all know that was a lie, but they had to put it aside because they felt powerless against the regime. So yes, his story there about how if you don't see it yourself, that's what he was trying to tell me. He says, if you don't see it for yourself, it's really hard to understand, or he thought it's impossible to understand. But I think, like in America and around the world, more and more people are starting to see that, wow, communism is seeping into our world. And some of the things that we're seeing seem really strange, and like, how could this be possible? It's unrealistic, yet it's here, it's happening. They're doing this, they're doing that, and they're saying it's okay. But this is what's happened in China over decades. They've had 70 years of this, and it's twisted the minds of people to the point in that example where they can say truth is illegal publicly. And that's insanity as far as I'm concerned. And but that's the point that they've come to. And that's essentially why I wrote that book, was because I don't want America and the rest of the world to go that way. And I think we need to wake up to it.
Yeah, that's very powerful. Well, tell us a little bit about your documentary film, Finding Courage.
So Finding Courage actually came before my book. My book is called Who Are China's Walking Dead? But I started Finding Courage first, and it was going to be just a short 10-minute film about a woman who had survived brutality in China. But then her brother I found out that her brother, who had been in a Chinese prison for 13 years for printing flyers, that's it, for printing flyers, he got out. He got out and he was able to come to America. And so suddenly our movie that was just going to be a short film became bigger, because we were able to follow this man's journey of healing. And to me, that was very powerful to see how someone that's been in prison for 13 years, who didn't know what an MP3 player was, didn't know an iPhone. And he's a very talented engineer. He didn't know how to speak English. He couldn't understand freedom, and to follow him on his journey of healing. And then the story also got bigger again, because that family, they also have a sister who was arrested for almost the same thing as me, for holding a banner on Tiananmen Square. But she was killed in a slave labor prison camp in China. And as unbelievable as all this sounds, I questioned everything from the family. I said, you have to prove that to me, because I can't. I may trust you as people. They're wonderful people, and
Right.
they come across as very honest. But as a journalist, I need to know. I need to fact check everything. And so they did. They provided me documents from the slave labor prison camp. They provided me documents from the court that had sentenced the brother to 13 years in prison for printing flyers. They the slave labor prison camp was the hardest one for me to understand, because they said the body of their sister was still being kept in the morgue under lock and key by the slave labor prison camp. And I said, how is that possible? Because so many people have just been killed, and the communist regime, they just burn bodies, they just destroy evidence. How is it even possible? And so they said, we're going to prove it to you. They went and filmed undercover inside the slave labor prison camp, and they got admissions directly from the head of the camp, the director of the camp, who says on camera in our movie, yes, we have the body. We have more bodies. This isn't the first one. We pay, X number of dollars a year to keep it in the morgue, and we will give it to you if you sign papers to say that your sister died of natural causes.
Right.
If you want to say that she was tortured or anything like that, I can't help you. See you later. That was when I got all of that footage. I mean, I was so scared when they told me they were going to go and film it, because I just thought
that right there, that part, when it got to that, my heart was racing. I thought, what are these people doing going back into the lion's den? So,
the lion's den, that's it. It was so scary. And they said, we're going. I said, no, you can't go. It's too dangerous. And they said, we're going, whether you like it or not. Will you help us? So we said, okay. We helped them with some glasses with a hidden camera, some hidden audio recording devices. And one of the family members, he didn't want to tell the others. He wanted to protect them because they're still in China. He took responsibility. He did it all himself, and he did the filming. And he got multiple angles and multiple audio recordings, and it's just the evidence is there, and it's just so shocking. And so I once the story came out, it became a feature film, because there was no way that I could tell this story in 10 minutes or even half an hour. So it's an 80-minute movie, and it's been doing really well in film festivals. But from there was I found the family couldn't answer, the family in the movie. It's a family story. It's a story of courage and faith and overcoming tragedy, and they still smile and they have hope. And to me, that's just, we need those stories now more than ever. And but they couldn't answer the questions for me of, how can the regime be so cruel? Why did it do these things? And so that's when I said, I need more. I need more evidence. And I found former Chinese Communist Party officials. I found some of them willing to talk to me on camera. Many more refused to go on camera, but I was able to get interviews. And I put that into the book, because so many people, after watching the movie, they said, I'm really interested in those guys. Who are they? Because there's only a few minutes in the whole movie, because it's not about them, it's about the family. And I said, you don't want to know. Their stories are too shocking and hard to understand, and just crazy. And they said, look, we really do want to know. And then when I really saw just things in America starting to be so affected publicly by communism, that's when I thought, okay, let me present the information that I found and from my study of interviewing these people. And so everything that didn't make it into the movie basically went into that book. So it's kind of like the companion to the movie, though it's not. It's an addition to the movie. There's no repeat in there. There's no spoilers either.
Yeah, that was very powerful. And then, when I started researching this and reading your book and watching all this, it's just, someone in the West is like, how is Falun Gong a threat? I mean, these look like, the most peaceful people, so gentle, meditating or doing some yoga type exercises. And yet, how are they such a threat to the Communist Party there?
That was my question too. especially when I went to China in 2001. And because I just couldn't understand, you know, to me, it really was the equivalent of saying yoga is banned in every park in America. That's what they did in China, because Falun Gong had become so popular that it was in every park in the morning. But you also look at say here in America, in Western countries, we have a history of, like, in the parks, people will jog, or they'll maybe do some form of other sport. Whereas in China, their type of sport is more health related, because it's a different healthcare system there. So they look for health programs that they can do, and especially those that have a minimal cost. And Falun Gong had the most minimal cost because it's entirely free. And it's actually the way it's taught is prohibited for anyone to earn money from it. So that's a strict rule with Falun Gong, because there's a book that goes into the exercises and the principles of the practice, and it says very clearly that no one is allowed to charge for teaching the exercises, and the exercises must be free. So there's only 5 of them, so it's kind of pretty easy for anyone to learn them, and there's no membership. There's not allowed to be a membership roster. But that, according to the Communist Party, that's a problem. That's a big problem, because every organization in China is controlled. And this is what I learned through interviewing these communist officials, because the regular citizens in China, they don't really study these things. It's not part of their daily lives. Whereas the officials, they operate for the regime. They know exactly what's going on. And so they told me, look, there is no business in China that cannot be controlled by the regime. You may not be directly controlled in an obvious way, but you must follow the rules. If you step outside the boundary, you are gone instantly. And it's the same with any organization. It's the same with religions. People say to me, oh, but look, there's freedom of religion in China. Look, there's the church. Oh, look, there's Buddhist temples and things. You go to the temples, you go to the church, and you see that they all have political appointments by the party, and the heads of the church, the heads of the religious organizations are put in place by the party and approved by the Communist Party. So essentially in China, Communist Party is God above all religions. And those who don't want to follow that, they're not within the communist structure. So they're seen as a threat, because the regime, as powerful as it is, or it seems to be, it's really a paper tiger in a way, because they're so vulnerable. Because if people know the truth, they're gone. Like that's it. The regime will collapse. And as long as people keep believing the lies and repeating the lies and telling themselves to believe the lies, then the regime continues. But yeah, so it is that it's the numbers with Falun Gong. It became so popular because it was extremely effective. It was free of charge. I've read so many newspaper reports, and we have a few in our movie of from the television reports of people saying our crime rates have gone down in cities because people were doing this practice, and they wanted to be more truthful, more kind, and they wanted to care for their health and other people. So crime rates went down, healthcare costs went down. This was reported nationwide, and that became a threat because it couldn't be controlled. There's no money to control. So it's as crazy as it seems. They decided to take that out. But then how do you take out a group when they thought they'd get rid of all the people who brought the music players to the parks? They arrested them all. Then what happened? Someone else had a music player at home. They brought it, because that's all you have to do is press play. It's that simple. And so they couldn't get rid of this, because people were saying, people said, my life is improved. I can survive. Some people had serious illnesses. And you tell them, no, you can't do this anymore. They felt like they were being given a death sentence. So what are they going to do? Some people are like, well, if I don't maintain my health, I don't want to go back and get cancer. I don't want to go back and live the life I lived before. So I'm going to stand up for it. And that's really, it became a life and death situation for many people for that reason. And it's become such a, it was a real thorn in the side of the regime. And, they haven't been able to stamp it out. It's one group. that has not been destroyed by the communist regime. And I think that's testimony to those principles, because you keep those in your heart, you're a very formidable opponent to any communist regime.
Yeah. Well, prior to the interview today, I sent a LinkedIn message to someone I'm connected to. They're actually in Hong Kong now, and I just wanted to get their take on it. I said, well, I'm going to be having Kay Rubacek on today, and she said, oh, death sentence, practicing Falun Gong, death sentence. She said, no, not good. So
There
they
you
started.
go. Yep.
So they started cracking down and arresting these people and putting them in prison. And I guess this kind of leads to your other film or documentary, which really even kind of gets a little bit more shocking. And of course, it's called Hard to Believe, and because that's a fitting title. When you first hear this, you really don't want to hear it, and then when you hear it, you don't want to believe it. But tell us a little bit about the Hard to Believe documentary film.
Oh, it is hard to believe. There's a crime that's been taking place in China since the 1980s. And it's where there is a law under the Chinese Communist Party that allows prisoners to be killed for their organs and for the sale of their organs. So it's legal in China. Now, Western countries, America and transplant organizations have talked to the regime and said, we don't like that. And so they've said many times, oh, we don't do it anymore. And then a few years later, they'll say, oh, yeah, we do it. Oh, yeah. And then a few years later, they'll say, no, we don't do that anymore. So they've been doing this on and off for the last 20 years. Anytime someone's criticized them, they'll say, no, we don't do it. But they never open their books. And then evidence comes out and it says they're doing it again. So in 2000s, when the Falun Gong persecution became really the primary, every 10 years or so, the regime has targeted another group for eradication. We're talking about human beings. And so in the 2000s, it was the Falun Gong group. And they're healthy. They don't drink. They don't smoke. Their organs are particularly healthy because they're doing exercise every day and they're trying to be kind to others. They're meditating so that there's less stress in their body. The organs are healthy. And there was a lot of them in prison. According to reports from human rights organizations, there was more Falun Gong practitioners in Chinese prisons than regular prisoners at certain points in the 2000s. So the regime is very utilitarian. They decided that they could make money off those people. And so they were imprisoned as they were innocent prisoners, but they were within the prison system. And so whether you call them religious prisoners or innocent prisoners or wrongfully imprisoned prisoners, it doesn't matter in China. You can be taken off the street, put into prison. You're a prisoner. You're in that system. They blood test you. They tissue match you. And they have a database. If you need a heart or liver from anywhere in the world, you can go to China. And in our movie, we show it advertisements from Chinese hospitals that you can get a heart or a liver within a week or two. Everywhere else in the world, you're on a list for years because someone has to die, right? Someone has to die for you to get a heart. But in China, they kill, and we have so much evidence of it. There is no lack of evidence. We have so much evidence, and there's been international criminal tribunals, legal tribunals have been held, and even the US government has issued resolutions relating to this issue and stating it's a crime. But it is hard to believe. It's hard to look at, because the fact that a government regime authority is allowing and encouraging the killing of innocent people for the sale of their organs is horrific. And we have many accounts, including a first-hand account from a doctor that we interviewed who had to kill somebody. This man had to kill somebody as a doctor for the removal of his organs, a prisoner. He didn't know if he was innocent or not, but he was a prisoner. And he didn't use anesthetic. Yeah. This is even more horrific, And this is happening regularly because anesthetic affects the organ that is being implanted in someone else. So the treatment of human beings by the communist regime is so dehumanizing. And if it can happen to one group, it can happen to anybody. And no one is immune from this disease of communism. And hard to believe looks at what happened to the Falun Gong practitioners in China. And I think it's a lesson to everyone of what could happen anywhere in the world if we allow communism in, because it just dehumanizes us to a point where we start to accept that killing or slaughter or sale of body parts is acceptable. And that's why we titled it Hard to Believe, because it really is. But even though it's a gruesome subject, the movie itself isn't gruesome. There's no blood and guts in there. There's no gore. It was even screened on PBS. It's been used in colleges and schools across the country and translated into multiple languages. So it is watchable, but it's we tried to make it as watchable as possible because the subject itself already is hard to swallow.
Yeah, I find it interesting. You know, they have the phrase, it's transplant tourism, that they can give you a specific date. I thought it was just really something. The surgeon in Israel, when he had a patient who desperately needed a new heart, and he said, I'm going to go to China in 2 weeks, and I'm going to get a new heart at 12 o'clock, and in 2 weeks from now. And he thought, well, that's just impossible. But when he went, got a new heart, exact appointment time, comes back, the doctor looks at him and says, something's going on. And as you stated, there's just so much evidence. And so I believe Israel was the first nation to really try to step up with their history, genocide and so forth with the Nazis and horrors there.
They did. It's really admirable what they've done. And the fact that doctors, there are numerous doctors that are doing something about it. There's organizations like Doctors Against Forced Organ Harvesting and the International Coalition to End Transplant Abuse in China. These organizations have really quite distinguished doctors and dignitaries and lawyers and academics who are working really hard on this issue. We've helped to, provide content like through our movies and things like that to these organizations, because they're really they're just right on the forefront of making things happen and helping people understand what's going on. Because doctors, it's hard to believe that doctors would involve in something like this, but in China, it's doctors that are removing the organs and they're responsible for removing the organs that kills that person. And when we interviewed that Dr. Enver Tohti for our movie, he for years he didn't realize what he did was actually killing someone, and it was just at one point after he left China. He talks about this in the movie, and I always find it quite touching when he describes that, how he left China, he went to another country outside. He said he went to the West, he started to adapt, and then one day he realized he committed a crime. And it really, he feels that guilt. But inside China, he didn't feel that, because the environment is that way where people say, oh, well, yeah, that's bad. That group of people, it's okay to happen to that group, or it's okay to happen to those people or these people. We're human beings, right? Like, if you say it can happen to that person and that person's done nothing wrong, then what's to say that couldn't happen to you or your family member or your friend or your colleague? And so that's when it opened up for him, only when he left the communist society and started looking at what happened. And it really shocked him. And I think it shocked him more that when he was there, he couldn't see it. He just couldn't see it. And so many people in China, they can't see it because they're right inside of it. And lots of the officials that I interviewed, some of them they didn't know until they left China what was going on there. They were just in it. They were absolutely stressed, and they were being broken, but they didn't know what was going on. And then when they left and looked from a distance, and that's the advantage we have, we can look at China, and sometimes I think we look and we say it's too far away, we don't have that problem, it's not going to be here, or it's not my problem, it's too, it's far away. But actually there's a benefit because it is a little further away that we can learn from it. But if we don't learn from it, then I think we're missing the point. So that's why essentially we made this movie, to help people look at these topics, because they are horrific. And if we just turn a blind eye to it, then it's just going to come here. That's basically what would happen if we are not aware.
Have you experienced any pushback on your films, censorship?
You bet. Plenty. Being an independent filmmaker and making movies like this, it's a really tough situation. I've had American colleges call me and say, "Kay, we're canceling your movie. I'm sorry to tell you, we have a movie screening lined up." This was even like with ethics classes. Our film's been used in a lot of ethics classes and sociology classes. And I've had some professors and administrators call me and say, "I'm sorry, we had to cancel the screening because we have too many students from China and we're afraid of losing funding."
Yeah.
And I think for everyone that told me that was happening, there's probably 10 more that didn't tell me, and they just canceled, or they didn't have the screening in the first place. I've had film festivals tell me that they are, directors of film festivals told me they are deathly scared to screen our movie because they have business interests in China, or they have financial partners that have business interests in China. And this is the environment we're in, is that we're being censored from telling the stories that really mean something to our world and that can really benefit us. And it's really difficult. We've had funding stopped from so many angles, where people will say, yeah, don't touch that. If you mention communism, you mention, say Falun Gong, like your colleague said, death sentence. That's what it is like in China. You mention that word, meeting's over. That's it. You're out. That's it. Some words can be mentioned under the CCP, like they don't mind certain groups because they have their own way of dealing with the propaganda, but there's other terms, you can't mention them. And it seems to be those are the ones that I have put the most focus on, because I feel compelled that, I've got kids and one day I'll have grandkids, and this will come out. All the slave labor prison camps are one day going to open. I really believe that, because throughout history, they always have. And this is just, there's no difference in, I believe, in what's happening now. It will open eventually. And there'll be a time, I think, when my kids or grandkids will look and say, "You knew about this. What'd you do?" Yeah. And so I don't want that on my conscience. And so I have these skills in production, and so I'm using them for that. But it's extremely difficult. It's extremely difficult. But it is rewarding. It's rewarding sitting in a cinema with a film festival and a big cinema screen, and with people who laugh and gasp and cry at the same time with the movie that you made. And that you've made an impact on their lives, and they're really appreciative, and we've won lots of awards. And it's just that knowing that there's a lot of brave people and a lot of brave business owners and film festival directors that have said, "We're going to screen this because it's a good story and we need to know about it." And it's going to entertain people, but also inform them. And so that gives me a lot of courage myself to finish making these movies and to keep going, because otherwise it can be a bit it's very challenging when you get shut off with censorship. I mean, I've been dealing with censorship for 20 years. That's what the regime does. It's just that now we're more aware publicly of what the CCP's been doing it, but I've been facing that for more than 20 years already. So it's part of the deal, I guess, at the moment.
And it seems like Washington, I know the senator, I believe it's the senator from California, tried to introduce something, and nobody wanted to touch it. All of the information was there, all of the facts were presented, they were quite shocked, and, putting forth this resolution. I think it was 245 of them voted for it. But at the end of the day, nothing happened. It's almost like we're more concerned about the dollar, the financial trade, than we are these human rights violations, atrocities that they're doing.
Well, the good news is that after our movie came out, we did see shifts and changes. And since then, there has been a resolution that did get passed. I think it was unanimously too, just last year.
Good.
So there is progress, but in the movie, yeah, we really highlighted that, because it was, the senator said, why is no one willing to look at this? And if we compromise on our human rights, then what does America mean then if we compromise on those freedoms of we the people? And I'm very inspired by the founding and history of this nation. The more I study the founding of regimes that have taken over so many countries, like a parasite. That's really how communism operates. The more I study that, the more I value the foundations here of this great country, because there was a choice that people made. They made it as one nation under God, and they decided on the freedoms that people were worthy of as human beings. And those are the things I think we need to keep perspective on. And it's challenging these days because there's so many things trying to take us away and undermine that foundation. But there is breakthroughs every now and then, and that's where we're seeing things like the recent resolution that stated organ harvesting as a crime happening in China and it needs to be stopped. Those things are happening, but it takes time, and that's where we have to have hope, we have to have courage, we have to have faith, we have to keep going, because all of these things take time. And the people that I've met through this process, some of them were part of those who helped dismantle the Berlin Wall, for example. And one of them told me, he said, Kay, it just takes time. Just don't give up. And he's seen changes over, he's, I think, in his 70s or 80s now. And he said, look, the changes that he's seen over the decades, it gives a lot of hope. And I think that's where we may not get things immediately. We want things immediately, but we don't always get them immediately. But we have to just be persistent in what's really standing up for convictions. And I think that's what my movie really is about. Finding Courage is just a family who stood up for their convictions, and they won. They won out against communism, and that I think gives a lot of hope.
I want to read to you a couple of rules here from the Naked Communist. I'm sure you're familiar with this.
Yeah.
And as I see what's going on in the United States, so Rule 17, get control of the schools. Use them as transmission belts for socialism and communist propaganda. Soften the curriculum. Get control of the Teachers Association. Boy. Put the party line in the textbooks. What are your thoughts on that, seeing how a lot of the universities are conducting themselves now, and the ties we see with China? And
that book was published, I think, 1956 or around that time.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And since then, there's been many books that have gone even further into it, and many that reference that. That was a seminal book. I've read that book and many of Paul Skousen's, Cleon Skousen's work, and his son Paul Skousen, and the author of that book was targeted by communists and communist sympathizers who tried to undermine his work. But if you just look at the work for itself and you fact check it, it stands its ground. There is no, and so I've gone further back than and researched what was in the sources for that book, and I've gone back to the Soviet propaganda. And even the training that the Soviet communists gave to their students in the 1920s. And they even had American students, Western students, studying at the Lenin University in the 1920s as well, under communism. And they were being taught tactics of how to deal with people who don't want to follow the communist rule. And so you use slanderous tactics, and you use that. There's no bottom line. And that's what the Communist Party officials told me. They said there is no bottom line. Anything goes as long as the goal is achieved. And so that goal that you read about, taking control of the school system, Lenin knew that, Stalin knew that, Mao Zedong knew that. They're the biggest killers in our modern history, the biggest mass murderers in history. And they knew if you can control the school system, you can control the minds of the generations. And that's what they've done. And so going back through the 1920s, 1930s, 40s, you look at the communist writings and what the communist people were writing about America. They knew America couldn't just be taken over through a bloodbath, because Americans are tough and they'd already beat the British before. So they weren't going to try that. In Russia and China, they took over violently, but also using underhanded means. But they knew in America they had to change the culture. That was what they had to do. And to change culture, you change education. You must control education, and you must control Hollywood. And that's why my work has been, it's so difficult to get movies out without Hollywood's backing. But there's ways to do it. You just have to be persistent and just keep going. And it's the same in the education system. That's exactly what they've done. And it's not like they've been working on this for the last 2 years or 10 years. They've been working on this for 100 years. Yeah. Stalin, Lenin, they all knew it. Yeah. So it's just now that more people are waking up to it. That book, Leon Skousen knew it in 1950s, and very clearly he articulated it so well in his speeches. And I think there's so many people that my work, I feel like I'm standing on literally standing on the shoulder of giants, because they have written and published these amazing works. And my books, I think, are making it accessible in more modern language, in our current social, cultural terms. But I'm not the first person to have looked into this. And that gives me a lot of hope too, because so many people have written and studied this before, and we can learn from them and also refer to and check their work. And you just see, it gives you so much courage that in like what you're doing, yes, this is right. No matter what the media might be saying, I have proof that the communists have a strategy to take over education. They have these tactics. They've carried them out. You can follow them back and check them. And you can go all the way back to Skousen's work and say, The Naked Communist, and you follow and check off everything on his list, and you say, he was not wrong. He was dead right on everything. And that's when we've got to wake up now, because you look at that and you say, I didn't believe him then. Now I should, because most of it's already come true, and he was right.
Yeah, you mentioned the media, and we hadn't really touched on that, but it's almost like silence. This is becoming more and more well known, and more documentation, and more people are speaking out, the less you hear about it from the mainstream media. It's people like you that are on the front lines, that are warriors trying to make people aware of what's going on.
We have to talk about it, because the media is, you have to look at who's controlling each organization, and the media follow the money. That's what I say to people. Don't just take my word for it. Follow the money.
Follow it. Yeah.
Right. Who is funding the news organization that you are watching and listening to? And if you are not hearing something, or you hear it from a certain source, it doesn't mean that that person's telling you something crazy or conspiratorial or anything. It just means that maybe what you're looking at isn't the whole picture. And this concept of, I mentioned the word conspiratorial, is even like a word like that. A conspiracy has been taken out of context and turned into such an evil term, and you can use that term to make anyone look bad or sound bad. But people are arrested, tried, and sent to prison every year for conspiracy. for conspiracy to a crime. It's an actual legal term. But the media has twisted it in the public eyes to take us away from education, right? If we had that education, if we knew how our money system really worked, if we knew who was funding the media that we're watching, if we knew who was paying for the drugs that are being advertised to us and pushing down, say, maybe natural therapies or cheaper options and things like that, you start to tie the dots together. But the hard thing is a lot of people don't want to look at it, because you start to it starts to unravel things. And when you look at things, and for me, because I've been doing this for more than 20 years and I've been censored all that time, and people didn't believe me before. I'd say I'm blacklisted. The media won't talk to me. People wouldn't thought I was, that's a bit strange, Kay. That's a little bit extreme, Kay. And now they say, oh, right, you knew this before, didn't you? It's just that once you start to realize that you've been lied to, and for a lot of people who are only following the mainstream media that's controlled by big corporations and government, then when they start to open their eyes and wake up and they realize, I've been lied to. Not only have they been lied to, they've agreed with those lies and they've promoted those lies. Then there's a sense of complicity, and that's hard to face. So I think we have to have compassion for people like that, because coming out of that mindset is really difficult. It's like the people coming out of a communist officialdom. People who may be religious believers, or people who have been able to see through mainstream media for a longer period of time, they're more aware of what's going on in the world. But there's a lot of people who aren't, and those people really need, I think, not our condemnation, but our support to help them unravel all that and to deal with the complicity of promoting what those lies have done through the media. And things will change over time. I don't know how exactly, but we see them changing, and we have to keep speaking out. And I think the more people speak out, the more things will change. But it's a test of our times. I think we're in a really historic, interesting turning point.
It's easy to get discouraged, but you just encouraged us to press on. I'm gonna hit one more. I find this interesting with infiltrate the churches and replace revealed religion with social religion, discredit the Bible and emphasize the need for intellectual maturity, which does not need a religious crutch. And you see what's happening in the church today with, wokeism, the social movement in the gospel, and, we no longer believe the truth of the Bible, the virgin birth, the resurrection, some of these things that we've held as tenets of the faith forever. It appears they've infiltrated the church as well as the school system pretty effectively.
Well, we say effectively, but and in their terms, yes, they think they've been pretty effective. But I think the fact that you're mentioning it, other people are mentioning it, it shows that they're not as effective as they want to be, because they want to turn us away from faith, and they think that just by changing the form or putting someone in place will change our hearts and our minds. And that's where I think we have to prove them wrong. In China, they've done this for decades. They've changed the Bible, they've changed the church, they've infiltrated, they've completely controlled all religion in China. And but there's still people of faith, and there's still people. There's the underground church. There's a lot of people of faith that have continued, and people say to me, what is faith like in China today? And I say, it's there. It's hard. Yes, it's hard. But what do you choose? Do you choose communism or you choose faith? My great grandparents, they chose faith over communism. They survived. And they were able to raise more generations of freedom-loving human beings. So I think the fact that we can talk about the infiltration in the church means that it's not as effective as they want it to be. but it's where the censorship of in the church is happening that we have to address, because I was at an event last year where there was a documentary film playing, Trevor Loudon, another excellent warrior against communism. He had a movie screening at a seminary, I believe, and they actually shut down the screening of it. I think the movie was called Enemies Within the Church, and it was a documentary, and it went through how that point that you had read out from Cleon Skousen's book has been implemented over the last few decades, and they give a lot of examples, and it's a very powerful movie. I've seen it; it's well done, but it was stopped, and the organizers weren't willing to talk about it, and that's where you start to realize that that's the danger, is when people are not willing to talk about it. But if we can bring that up, then we can, it's not a matter of just pushing back. It's actually forcing people to have conversations that are difficult, that are hard to believe, that are hard to address. But if we do that, then that's where people's minds can just open, I think, and hearts. And that's where faith exists no matter what. And I think we really have to maintain that. But yep, the church has been targeted, because the communists know if they control the youth through education, and if they control our hearts through faith, then they will rule. But what they forget is that they're not God, and they are, who's more powerful? That's what it comes down to ultimately. But we've got to make our own choices as to what side of history we're going to be on, I think.
What's the future for Kay Rubacek look like?
Oh, I wish I knew. I have a number of documentaries that I've been working on with some really talented directors and producers this year. And so I've actually been helping train others to get more stories out, because just doing them on my own, I can only make so many. So that's been really rewarding. You'll see a few of them coming out. Actually, some of them will be out on Epoch TV very soon. And so that's very exciting, and on issues that need to be talked about. And I've got a number of other projects in the works. So as to where they'll take me, I don't know. I do have a new book coming out. I released it last year. It's called Nowhere Left to Run, 10 Steps to Survive Tyranny Today. I released it as a PDF, but this year I'm releasing it as a workbook. And you'll be able to buy that from my website and on Amazon. And it has pages that can be used in classrooms, in church groups, in any organization, because people were asking me, they said, we want to implement these steps into our work, into our book clubs, and can you give us discussion questions? And I said, you bet I can, because this is what I do. So I created a workbook, and you'll be able to buy it as a PDF or as a physical book. And that's what's on the horizon for me. So keep an eye out for that. You can go to my website, kayrubacek.com, and sign up for my email newsletter, and that's when you'll find out when the book is launched. It will be available soon.
All right, look forward to reading that. Well, any parting comments you want to leave with the viewers?
Oh, just keep faith, keep hope, and really the one story that I tell in my new book is the power of the simple things. A woman that I interviewed who had survived years in the slave labor prison camp, she said that the prison guards would do anything to keep them from making eye contact with each other, the prisoners. These were religious prisoners, innocent ones, and because the eye contact between prisoners would give hope, just that glimmer in a split second would give hope to say, I'm not broken. You'll be fine too. We'll be okay. So the prison guards would try to keep them from looking at each other. They had to keep their heads down. They couldn't look eye to eye. And what was even more powerful was a smile. If you smiled, then the labor camp, it was like a light went off, a shock went through the system to say, you will be okay. I am okay. I'm not broken. You will survive too. So I think we can just get back to some of the basics and just the really human things of like supporting each other, asking how each other are, just caring for others. Give a smile. You don't know how much your smile may help someone else that day. And we'll need these things now, because these are really tough times. I think everyone's just struggling. So these are the little things, some stories from my book, but that one, just the power of the smile, is one chapter in that book. And so that's the parting words I like to leave with people, is that just don't underestimate yourself. You know, just the simple act of, you know, this, especially when it's connected here. You don't know, we forget our own power and where it comes from. And when you've got that, you know, you don't have to worry as much as I think we all do. So,
well, thank you so much for your time and for your inspiration and for your just being involved in the battle and in the front lines in this. God bless you. You know, you're welcome to come back anytime.
Thank you so much. I'd love to. Thank you.